Okay, let's start this. So, Ken, thanks for the wonderful keynote you gave us this morning. We are super excited to have you here with us, talking more about the DevOps, continuous delivery, and what that means to for all of us, and all of how we can shift our efforts to towards that, to build that. Also, thanks for being here in this second type of conversation that it's more open, where I'm going to ask you some things, we can have this little talk, and then at the end, we're going to open the mic so everyone can also ask you things. Let's say the last 8 to 10 minutes maybe. So first, I heard yesterday that this is your first travel, I think, since COVID started or something like that. How was the flight? How is it this COVID situation now?
Yeah, it's my first international travel in 30 months. And to put that in perspective, prior to COVID, I averaged 150,000 miles per year. I'm not sure what that is in kilometers, but I used to travel quite a lot. And so it's very different. The flight itself was great. Again, I apologize for not speaking the local language, and I was on Aeromexico. Oh. And so it was a little hard
yes.
to hear the announcements, but everybody has been great.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And so you've been here for a couple of days now. Have you tried any Chilean food so far?
So I got empanadas last night, which was a must-do. My partner at home is very jealous. She tried to find a local restaurant and send me the menu, and I'm like, no, those are Colombian. It's corn. You don't want corn on the but
Nice. You have to eat completos too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's like hot dogs, but when 100 toppings on it.
Sign me up.
Yes. Nice. So, and finally, how did you like our offices? How different they are from yours?
You know, it's funny. I live in a city called Seattle. And ThoughtWorks does not have an office there. So my entire time at ThoughtWorks has been remote. So this has actually been my first time in an office in 3 years.
That's
so
amazing.
It's a beautiful office, but I don't have a lot to compare it to.
Oh, yeah. But it's amazing to come to an office, right, and see people.
It really is, to be able to interact with people. You know, for 2.5 years now, we've been on Zoom. And I think remote working, both pairing for writing code, and everything has gotten better, but it's still no substitute for in-person and body language and all of those types of things. So I'm very happy to be back out with real humans and not avatars.
Nice, excellent. Thank you for all of for sharing all of that. So now going a little bit more to the technical thing. So I wanted to ask you first, what are the basic building blocks that a company needs to have continuous delivery in general? What would you say?
So I'm going to cheat a little bit. The first one is continuous integration. I don't like the phrase CI/CD. To me, it implies that continuous delivery is just adding a deployment step to the end of continuous integration tests. And I think it's much more than that. It's more about understanding the customer feedback loop and acting on that feedback and making a hypothesis. So I think if I do this in my product, that I will get this result. And I can write the code and deploy it and test it and get that business feedback. That, to me, is different than continuous integration. But you have to have CI. My boss, Rebecca Parsons, the CTO, tells a joke. If you ever go to an amusement park, they'll often have a sign that says, you must be this tall to ride. Sorry, Alexei, our managing director, anyway. But it's kind of the same thing. If you don't have good automated testing, if you don't have a good knowledge of automated security and automated compliance, you should not be deploying software automatically on every change. So you must have those fundamental practices in order to deploy safely.
Right. And what of those building blocks do you think is the most challenging in the industry today? What are people having more problems trying to learn or implement?
So I have to use a consultant's favorite phrase, it depends. Often the challenge is what the teams are being measured on. So I'm often asked, if I implement continuous delivery, will I be able to deliver a specific feature faster? And the answer, I'm sorry, is no. Each feature will take longer because I'm going to shift some testing left. I'm going to spend more time on security. I'm going to spend time on observability. I'm going to spend time on other automation. And so that individual feature might take longer, but it's more reliable. You get feedback that that's what the customer needs. So overall, you're faster. But convincing sometimes management that your velocity, like if we're using things like story point velocity for performance, first, please stop. But if you are, it's sometimes hard to let that velocity go down in order to get the better quality that you're accepting. And so it's really hard in some organizations to say, this isn't an investment. We're going to pay people to do work that they're not doing now so that we can deploy faster and get faster. And it's often very hard to convince people of that.
Interesting. I think this might have to do with the next thing I wanted to ask you, that is not only about the building blocks, but what do you see are the major challenges that our clients have in their day-to-day in order to achieve this continuous delivery culture and DevOps, and I don't know if it's that or more things.
Yeah. So let me make sure I understand the question. You're asking what other challenges are for how to.
Yeah, the challenges in general for companies to adopt continuous delivery. Yeah. You talk about wanting to invest basically on it, but what else can be big challenges?
It's like a lot of things is that you're making an investment in the future, and there's not the immediate payoff. I mentioned this morning in my talk, retailers during COVID, and the retailers who had good digital transformation, who had systems they could deploy quickly, who had systems they could change quickly, were able to react. That's when they got the payoff. The payoff wasn't earlier while they were building the pipeline and everything. It was that they could gain the trust that the business could come to them and say, we now need to be able to automatically ship to home. And how long is that going to take us? And they could do that in a few days instead of a few months. I'm not sure about here. I imagine it's the same. We had many, many retailers go out of business in the last couple of years. And in many cases, it was because they couldn't compete digitally, because that's where the market went. And so the challenge is the same with the story point velocity. It's how do I invest for future benefit?
Yeah, and have the patience to actually see how you get that return on time. Yes. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And so what do you think is the role on people in organization in this? And how can the organization help people in order to be ready to implement all of these changes that are necessary?
Yeah. One of the biggest things, and I mentioned this morning as well, is this concept of psychological safety. And it's the ability to say, I'm trying this, it might not work, and if it doesn't work, I learn something and I move on. and to be safe that I'm not going to get in trouble because it failed. I see organizations like, hey, we're going to champion innovation. And so how many ideas can you come up with? And then do at least 50% of those ideas make it into a product? And I'm sorry, that's just a horrible idea. Because who's going to be willing to put forward what my idea is if I'm not at least 50% sure it's going to make it into a product? Okay, so it's that culture of experimentation at the organizational level, and that supportive culture that we're going to try things. Some of them are going to work really well. Some of them aren't going to work at all. And some are going to be somewhere in the middle. If the organization can provide that atmosphere, that will help enable all of the other things that are required.
Right, yeah, and put like the right incentives on people so they can like build, that's, yeah, that's, because it's easy to say and put it in the wall basically, like, yeah, you have like safety, it's like, yeah, you're right, but then it's hard to achieve. Now moving, like shifting to the devs basically, like to new devs basically, what would you recommend for them if they want to start learning about continuous delivery? Where should they focus their effort?
So it's a little bit hard question because continuous delivery itself, a pipeline, a workflow, fairly simple. I do this, and if it passes, I do that. And if that passes, I do that. So that's easy. The hard part is the thing you're doing. And so, like if you're a new grad dev, automated testing, and automated testing. You know, if like we often on most of our projects use something called test-driven development. We do a lot of pair programming so that people are sharing knowledge. The better the automated tests are, the better the pipeline is. Okay, a pipeline cannot prove that a thing is good. Okay, you can't run a build and run a suite of tests and know for sure that that thing is good, because you might not have all the tests, and you don't know what you don't know. A pipeline's job is to prove something is bad. Okay, it's to kill a release candidate. Every build is a release candidate. It's the pipeline's job to prove it's not good enough. And it can't do that if it's not running good tests. And so it really is about testing. And it's cliche, but it's about the shift left. And if people aren't familiar with that term, it used to be, when I was younger, not young, but younger, that you'd build the software and then you would hand it to the testers or you would hand it to the security people. We want to get all of that testing sooner too. And so that means we need those skills on the team. I specify team there. Not every developer has to learn everything, but the cross-functional team should be able to develop those things that need to go in the pipeline.
Cool. No, yeah, makes a lot of sense. And let's say we have like a leader of a big organization who has heard about like continuous integration. It's important, like how important that is and how can like change things, but he doesn't know anything about it, only the name. What would you recommend could be like their his first steps in order to start understanding so he can push it to the organization?
So I like when people set up an experiment or a pilot or a proof, for example. But it has to be something important. So one of the retailers that was doing this, close to my home, has a very long development cycle for everything, or did 10 years ago. And they said, we want to take on these new practices. And so they found a piece of their architecture that was important, but not used by a lot of people yet, but they were going to build on it. And they said, we're going to trust you, team, to be self-organized, to choose your own requirements based on interaction with your customers, all of those things on this part of the business. and then we're going to see if you're successful. Now, it has to be an important project, because if it's not, by definition, nobody cares. So they can be successful, but it won't have an impact on the business. You know, the general managers up won't care, because it's, okay, you automated the cat meme. Okay, but because it's an important thing and they got to prove it, they could test these things and then show success. In this particular case, they had their customer, the business, and by the way, I dislike saying it's the business and the development teams, because we're all part of the business. Okay, it's important that the development teams understand the value that they're creating for the company. But the business, their customer, came to them and said, hey, we had a significant event happen. We need to react. It wasn't COVID. It was before this. They were able to react, get them the features they needed in a couple weeks, and they were, what? It takes a year to get something in production. They were so amazed that now that entire organization has adopted these practices, and the person that did it said she automated herself out of a job, which she says is a good thing, by the way. She used to have to do approval boards for every little change. She doesn't have to do that anymore, because now they do experiments, and they prove that sales went up. And so she moved on to a different company, and she's doing the same thing for them now.
Nice, yeah, to have like a quick prototyping and showing that things work, actually.
Yes.
Yeah.
And where work is defined as increase the business. It's not just that they pass the tests. It's not just that it runs on the latest EKS. It's that it makes the business more effective.
Exactly, yeah. And like, so now we have all of these options, like accessible options for a cloud, right? Where you can like build your DevOps like environment very easy, basically, and not paying much. Mm-hmm. So what do you think are or what have you seen that are like the advantages and disadvantages of now having this so like on hand, basically?
Yeah. The advantages, if it's done correctly, or that it is very easy to get a test environment to prove a thing. There's a thing called canary deployment, where I can say, I want to deploy this new feature to 5% of my audience. And the ability to spin up a production environment and do that is very, very powerful. The biggest downside probably is cost control, because none of these environments are free. And so we want to empower developers and teams to do their tests and do what they need to do, but we also have to acknowledge there's real money. And so there's a little bit of a business trade-off there. So as a technologist, love it. If it's made with automated infrastructure as code, so that we know it's the same environment and all of those kinds of things. So if they're built correctly, love it. The other risk, though, is that I could, in a matter of just a few minutes, create a new application, put it on the public cloud, put ThoughtWorks logo on it, and do something really silly. Just a bad application. And there's brand risk there. And so, okay, we want to give people power, but we also have to think about our risk.
Yeah, now things can be published faster, and like, that's true about cost too. It can like scale very, very, very fast, and you learn like after. Like, and what would you recommend for this, for an example, like budget control thing? What can you do on cloud in order to?
I'd recommend ask Keith. I'll be honest, it's not an area that I purposely pay attention to, that there's a financial thing, but at the same time, working for the CTO's office as forward technologist, as opposed to the CIO's office, which in our organization is the person that runs the internal thing, I try to say the flowery hill and let him worry about how much it costs.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, the importance of having a team, right? Everyone with different, like...
Exactly.
Brilliant. So let's talk about, I don't know, the next 5 years. What do you think is coming for a continuous delivery? What is next?
So it's interesting because I think I said a little bit earlier, continuous delivery itself is simple. And so I'll be honest, we cheated a little bit. I knew this question was coming, and yesterday I told her, nothing. Continuous delivery hasn't changed in 10 years. Why would it change in the next 5? And there is some truth to that. The continuous delivery book published in 2010 is still very valid today because the practices haven't changed and probably won't change. What does change is what we're running, the tests and those sorts of things. What's going to get really interesting is to see how we test software that's deployed to somebody's virtual reality headset. You know, how do we test software that gets deployed to a car that's driving down the highway at speed in an environment that we didn't predict in our test environment? And so it's those types of things of how do we do the verification? How do we observe? There's this concept of observability, which is not just logging, by the way. How do we observe how these systems are behaving? If it's on Amazon's public cloud or it's on Google Cloud, I can observe it. I can see that a thing happened, infer why it happened, etc. If somebody using a virtual reality headset walks into a wall, I can't see that. And so I think that's going to be the biggest challenge is not a big fan of the whole, what do I want to call it, hype around metaverse and those types of things. But one of my team members does virtual reality gaming all the time. So, I mean, there is real things here. And so how do we teach developers how to create something in a three-dimensional environment? On a web app, I can make somebody click on this before they click on that. In virtual reality, I can't control when they're going to turn around backwards and grab the sun out of the sky. You know, and so how do I deal with those things I don't know the answer, frankly. And I'm really curious to see what it turns out to be, or what the multiple answers turn out to be.
Well, that could be, thank you. No, that's very exciting, the future, actually. Well, I'm running out of time here to keep asking you things, and I have to share you with the public, actually, though I wanted to ask you so many more things. Thank you for this super insightful moment. And now I would like to open the mic, people, for all of you, or I don't know if people in the internet too want to ask something. If you want to speak in English, it's fine. If you want to speak in Spanish, you can do it. I can translate, and everything is cool also, people. So I don't know if anyone have a question for Ken.
Yeah. Hello. My name is Karina. I would like to ask you if you can share some advice about how to show the value, as you said, right? Because you do an investment, you spend time, and it has been hard for me as consultant, actually, sometimes to convince the client, why are you spending a lot of time on it? And I am like, okay, there is a trade-off, right? If I don't spend this amount of time, I cannot check that this could get run. Basically what you said, right? The pipeline allows me to know it could be run. How much risk do you want to take? Because if I don't do it, then the risks are higher. If you have any advice of showing that, because for example, I remember one example that we were doing logging and tracing in a distributed architecture we have. We spend a lot of time on it. And it is hard to show that value until you are deploying, and then you don't have issues. It's something like that. It's actually we were sitting, and everything was smooth, and we have all the visibility that everything was moving the way we expect. So if you have some advice based on your experience of how the teams can show that value.
Yeah. So one of the things that came up earlier in one of the talks was the 4 key metrics. What's important to understand about those is that the people that came up with them put a lot of truly valid research. At first, when that report started, it was from the State of DevOps report. It started 10 or 12 years ago. It was ThoughtWorks and Puppet Labs and a couple other companies. And frankly, it was just a survey that had no scientific value. Now, it really is based on real metrics. They've had it done and everything else. And they can demonstrate the cost of mean time to recovery and things like cycle time. So a lot of the value is time to market. So to the client, let's say you're a fashion retailer, and they come out with somebody comes out with a new line, and you want to get that to your customers. What's the value of you being able to have that on your website tomorrow versus your competitor having it on their website in 3 weeks? Because everybody saw the announcement, everybody saw the TikTok, and they want to go buy the thing. What's the value of being the first one to sell the thing? And so time to market's a very, very big one. Depending on the organization, I'm not sure if it translates well, but in English we say carrot and the stick. So the carrot is, what's the good thing I get if I do this right? The stick is, what's the bad thing that happens if I do this wrong? Organizations and people mostly are driven by one or the other, and not both, on an individual basis. So for a lot of organizations, I need this logging, I need this observability, I need this ability to react when, not if, when something goes wrong. Because distributed applications are hard. And Amazon S3 goes down and half the internet goes down. So am I going to be in that half? Or am I going to be in the half that had a failover that worked? So a lot of times the value is in risk management. And then a lot of times it's not obvious at all what the value is. Because what some organizations will do is they'll say, these are the things we're doing in our business. This is how we're coming up with our requirements and so forth. And now we're going to re-architect so where we can have an architecture that allows fast delivery and all these things, but we're going to keep doing business the same way. They're not going to get any value. What they were, but maybe if they could run more experiments, that might be a value. If we can run experiments and find out what gets people more excited. And so it's a very hard question, but it's mostly around not breaking down so often. Still going to break down, sorry. And time to market are probably the biggest ones. Yep.
Thanks, Ken. Does anyone else have a question for Ken?
Hola. Hi, I'm Juan Carlos. I'd like to ask you, what would you say to a company that's trying to get involved into an experiment-driven development all the time? They're trying to do a lot of experiments, but they're finding out that most of them are failing experiments. They are failing. They're not having a good results working with them. What would you tell them to try to keep doing that and not get a bit disappointed and stop trying to do that all the time? Because they're seeing it maybe as a waste of money. They are using a lot of teams, a lot of people trying to do that, and they are not seeing a return. So what would you say to some company that's having that kind of issue?
Yeah, so it depends on the type of experiment. But if we're talking about experiments where I'm going to make a change to my application and then see the impact on the business, I did say that you need the ability to fail, but let's not underestimate the value of good product management. And not everybody on the team has to have these skills, but somebody does, that does know enough about that industry, those customers, and they're talking to the customers, and they're hearing their problems, because I don't want feature requests from customers. I want problem descriptions from customers. And so then, based on their knowledge of the industry, of their product, of the customer, they put an experiment out there. And so the experiment likelihood of passing goes up, the better the knowledge is, right? And so, I mean, if you're just trying things at random, let's change the color, then sorry, but that's not going to work. And so, honestly, if most of the experiments, of that style experiment, if most of the experiments are failing, then there is an actual problem, that we don't know our customer well enough, and we probably need to do some discovery and learn more about our customer. Or something, if you watch the keynote from earlier, there's overload, cognizant load, or that's not the right word, but it's the cognitive load, sorry. If that team is worried about 47 different things, they're responsible for managing the AWS account, and they're responsible for getting all of the patches done, and they're responsible for things, and they're responsible for customer-facing features. Humans just can't think of that many things at once. And so that's where the team topologies models and those empowered teams come in, is we need somebody that knows enough about the things to deploy it, but we don't have to have, the team doesn't have to be the expert at everything. They should be an expert in their product. Make sense?
Okay, people, I think we are on time for now. We are going to be sharing with Ken anyways, like outside after we close this. So thank you again, Ken, for sharing like the stage with me, for sharing your experiences, your opinions, like your insights. And I hope you have a wonderful time on the time you have left here in Chile. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. And thank you for putting up with people that only speak one language.